Tonight, we will take a look at the latest on the bombing in Boston. Now, here's what we know again so far on the latest. The suspect, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, spent the weekend in a hospital recovering from wounds to his neck and his lower body. Now, earlier this afternoon, he talked to investigators, and reportedly, he was able to respond to questions. Now, authorities that had charged him with one count of using and conspiring to use a weapon of mass destruction, resulting in the death of others, and one count of malicious destruction of property by means of an explosive device. Now, the charges were read to him today in his hospital room, and if convicted, these charges will make him eligible for the death penalty. Now, after he was captured, the suspect didn't receive his Miranda rights, and this sparked debate across the country. Tonight on the phone with us is attorney Brian Willams from Los Angeles. And Brian, what's the deal with this situation? Was it the right step for the federal government to, one, take over the case, and two, not Mirandize the suspect?
Well, good evening, first of all, to you. I think it's really not a question as to whether or not it was a right step or not. There are a bunch of legal issues at play that the feds have to first look at. Number one, this exception to the Miranda rules, which we call the public safety exception, is really for those instances where there's still imminent danger, imminent harm. Here, they captured the bomber, but they didn't know whether or not he had additional bombs around, whether or not he'd been working with other people. So I think they were right at that point not to give him those Miranda warnings and to interrogate him at that point to make sure there was no other public safety issues involved. Thereafter, it's my understanding that he did receive his Miranda warnings, and because he did receive those Miranda warnings, that was our first clue that he was going to be tried in federal court as opposed to a military tribunal.
Now, the other question is, I know Senator John McCain and some of the other members of the Senate have even gone as far as saying that he should be tried as an enemy combatant. Can they do that? This guy is an American citizen. He was naturalized, I think it was September 11th, 2011. He is a naturalized American citizen, and this incident or attack did happen on United States grounds, on domestic grounds. So can they even charge him as an enemy combatant?
From a purely legal perspective, the answer is really a resounding no. This whole notion of an enemy combatant is really something that occurs during war, when there is an enemy of the state, someone whom we're fighting against, and that person is arrested for some sort of terrorism charges or something of that sort, and that person is, by the law, defined as an enemy combatant. Here we have an American citizen who was on American soil, and unless we can prove that he was a bona fide member of Al-Qaeda or a member of the Taliban or some other organization that the United States is currently at war with, there's really no legal justification to label him as an enemy combatant.
And I think one of the things that we forget when you look at Miranda, that people think that, well, because he wasn't read his Miranda rights, that Miranda, it's thrown out. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Miranda really applies to the confession and whether it can be used or not. But in this case, there are there's other evidence that's available that points to this guy as being the suspect that the federal government has. So Miranda really doesn't apply when it comes to that. Am I right in that speculation?
Well, essentially Miranda comes into play once the law enforcement officials or really any government agent is going to interrogate a suspect, and those statements that they receive from the suspect are going to be used in the subsequent prosecution. Here, again, because of the public safety issues involved, Miranda really wasn't impacted early on, in my opinion. There are huge public safety issues here. We didn't know how many bombs were left. We didn't know whether or not he was working with other people. So it really wasn't at play. However, had he been deemed an enemy combatant early on, and there were no Miranda warnings at any point, then the statements that were received by the federal authorities during the interrogation would not have been able to be used in a subsequent criminal trial. In fact, the courts have really warned the government in previous cases in saying, listen, you can't just willy-nilly, if you will, declare a person an enemy combatant just to get statements from them. Because when you come to my court, I just may reduce the charges and throw out all those statements that you have, and that will affect your ability to prosecute the person. So the Miranda rule was, in fact, impacted, but because of the huge public safety issues early on in this case, I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue.
Gotcha. Again, Brian Keith Willams, Brian, BKW Law, BKWLawGroup.com. We'll make sure your website's on our site. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit of insight as to what's happening on the ground in Boston. I will be covering the story in its completion. Right now, the city of Boston is now, federal investigators have returned control of the corridor where the bombing has happened back to the city. And we'll keep you up to date with the latest on our website, bouncenews.tv.